my father's docket on how he died. I've been doing that research for quite some time now. I found the docket case at the police station. It's still there lying somewhere. Through a friend who was a police officer, it's still there. And PRC, are you aware of that? What have you done with that documentation? I just give you that challenge. Think about it. In some cases, dockets were not compiled. It was a genocide, right? Though we refuse to acknowledge that it was a genocide in the social circles. The government has of yesterday given a green light to devolution. Am I right? Devolution, do you agree? We've been given a green light. Indeed, it seems like maybe times of reflection, times of refreshing are upon us as a country, and Matabeleland in particular, Matabeleland and Midlands. But where do we start from? What do we do? I believe the time to assert our rights as a people, as a country, is now. As we sit here, we're saying never again. That's the theme, am I right? Yes. We're saying never again, but where do we start from? Ladies and gentlemen, I think it starts from the liberation of the mind. Starting to understand that the government is a bunch of civil servants that we employ to run this country. Alright? Those are our workers. No more hero worshipping of people and letting 20,000 people die and we keep silent. And we sit meeting after meeting, no act to talk about, nothing, just the framework, just the general framework, over 30 years down the line. Where is the framework to deal with Kukrahundi today? I, for one, believe heads must roll. Whether it's in Parliament, whether it's in Harare, wherever, about this issue, crimes against humanity, heads must roll. We need closure in Matabeleland. Did you enjoy the road yesterday going to Amakuku? Let's see those who enjoyed the road. Okay. It seems no one enjoyed the road. Why are we having such a road so many years down the line after independence? So many years after Kukrahundi? Why do you think the road is like that? Baba is an answer for us.
So that it is not accessible.
So that you cannot access. You can hardly make it to Palagwe using an ordinary ex-jab car. That was part of the strategy. And here we are, we are still doing meetings. Now that devolution is here, ladies and gentlemen, we need vibrant people, especially from our region, from the leadership in the house. I'm sure you are hearing this. We need vibrant people who know what they are doing, not people that eat their conscience with a fork and knife and pretend nothing happened. We need people that will champion the promulgation of a Kukrahundi Act. Whether I want to call it a Kukrahundi Act, whether I want to call it Moment of Madness Act, let there be a law that deals with Kukrahundi. Full stop. Once that statute is in place, it will specify gender inclusion that Nonhlanhla was speaking about just now. It would put down the nitty-gritties of how this and that is to be dealt with. If we have done that with the constitution that we have, we can still do it with the Kukrahundi. Why not? That's the question that I'm posing to the House. Up to today, Zimbabwe as a country, former Commissioner Tekla just mentioned also in Kenya, they don't have what you call the Witnesses Protection Act. Typical African countries, right? That's how we do things. How do I stand up and testify and say, my father was killed, 6 businesses of my family were burnt down, leading to his death, my sisters were raped, we have got 2 nephews that were born of this 50th Brigade, and how are we going to protect those people? Have a scenario whereby they can tell the truth without fear. We've spoken about fear. A scared person, you can never get concrete evidence from a fearful person. And you look at some of these crimes, rape, torture. Some of these people, their private parties were banned. How do I stand up in an open space and say, this is what happened to me? With the current setup that we are having. I don't know NPRC whether you've got those facilities with the funding that you are having right now, but I believe we need to promulgate that act that will specify how we are going to protect the witnesses. We can't just be opening wounds. You can't just be risking our lives. As young as I am, I don't know how many times I've been chased by the CIO knocking at my gate for speaking the truth, for doing my job, human rights defending. That's not right. We need to arise as a people. Perpetrators of violence, they are not supposed to be in public offices. Right now, I always tell people when I travel, I don't have a president in my country. How do I look at you and say you are my leader when you have got dirty hands, your hands are full of blood? Just how? How do we sit and eat our consciences and behave as if nothing wrong has happened in Zimbabwe? How do you expect Matebelen to arise? You call us unlearned. All the insults that we have, all the terms and whatever that we have been called. How do we expect our people to arise and bring development to this nation? Surely the least that we need right now is a law that will specify how we're going to deal with this issue. Nothing more, nothing less. The NPRC is not mandated to deal with Kukrawundi. It just happens by chance to be part of their agendas. But are they just mandated to deal with Kukrawundi only? No wonder why Kukrawundi gets up compared with Operation Mrambatwi. And we expect Matebeleland to be the industrial hub of Zimbabwe. And the government should just fund. Commissioner Tekla, former Commissioner Tekla just indicated that the Kenyan government put in 90% of the funding towards the commission, the Truth Justice. Let them fund it. Let them fund the Kukrawundi Museum. Let them fund the Kukrawundi trauma centers where women can tell of their experiences in private and in confidence, where truth-telling is not a risk to your own life and your own future. Rwanda did it. Why can't Zimbabwe do it? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. We need vibrant people. We need vibrant people like you. That's all I'm going to say. Last but certainly not least, Virginia, please, will you sit or are you going to?
No, I'll sit.
Okay.
Thank you very much, moderator, and I want to thank also my sisters for really getting us to walk the journey that women walk as we talk about transitional justice, but as we also talk about just generally any justice. I'm going to focus more on the context that is the gender inequality in our country, because for whatever topic we're going to talk about, the context, as Elizabeth said, is very important. So much so that even as we express shock at whatever conflict, whatever outrage happened, we have to also understand that within that shock, there are some people that may be invisible, but felt it more than other people. And as I talk about invisible, and remember this is a word that's coming from the three of us. This morning I felt very invisible. And I'm wearing a very bright dress. And I'm wearing a very crazy hairstyle. But I felt very invisible because I lifted my hand for a long time. Up until the person who had the mic was feeling bad and was whispering to me, just speak. But for my purposes, I didn't want to just speak. I was here, I had something to say. And one of the things I wanted to say was to thank the moderator then, that he started off the session by acknowledging the difficult choices, the bravery that women show in the situations of outrage that we talk about. Because a lot of the time, when we talk about these situations, women are just portrayed as victims. They're just portrayed as people that needed to be assisted. But a lot of the times, women find themselves without any societal support, taking responsibility for homes that they don't own. I remember a lot of the politically motivated violence. You'll find that maybe the one who's the actor, she said that I think it was Nonhlanhla, that more men would find themselves targeted because they are at the forefront. Part of their being targeted is that the people that are dear to them are used to punish them. But a lot of the times we also had situations where, because the man is targeted, he will run off into the hills, he will run away from home, and the woman remains behind with the children, and she then becomes a target. And at the end of the day, you find that as we then do the documentation, that does not always come out. I think we had that this morning, and I'm not going to go deeper into that issue, but we need to be able to get to a point where, as we are talking about any situation in our country, let's all of us take part in building a just and equal society. Because it is that inequality that creates or perpetuates some of the marginalization and the increased vulnerabilities of other groups. I asked the colleagues to put that picture on the screen. And you find, if I just use the issue of equality before the law, because I think it has also been said that when we get to the criminal or the justice delivery system, we have equality before the law. Except that from a gender perspective, equality before the law is actually a disadvantage. Because it doesn't then quite bring out the nuances. It doesn't then quite bring out the real meaning where a woman sells a cow that she and her late husband bought. And because he's late, the relatives of the husband are refusing to work with her, but she needs the children to go to school, so she sells the cow. Except what happens is that the relatives then go and report her for stock theft. And she goes to jail for 9 years. And part of why she goes to jail for 9 years is because when the lawyers are asking her whether she sold the cow, she has serious righteous indignation, because as far as she's concerned, her selling of the cow is not a problem, it's her cow. So she says, yes, I sold the cow, and she goes to jail for 9 years. And this is a real story I'm telling you. I've talked to a woman who went to jail for 9 years, and she's not the only one. But this is just an example for us to understand that even as we come into this space and talk, we've got a situation where at a family level, we have condoned certain behaviors that if we were to maybe ask each and every one of us here to reflect into your own behavior, your own attitudes at a family and household level, you would not have the credibility to stand and talk in this particular forum. Because we have gender-based violence on a daily basis, and it's taken as normal. Not just by society, but we have even normalized it ourselves as women, where we start to prepare women to say, you know, this is what's normal. But part of that comes from the system that we have created together, where we have said certain violences. I think when the colleague from, is it DRC in the morning, was talking about amnesties and what is considered as serious crimes. To me, when that word is said, I then just say, okay, so which ones are the serious crimes? Because to me, to the Gender Commission, serious crimes are the crimes that happen every day behind locked doors. They are the crimes that we never hear. I'm not undermining the crime we are here to talk about. I feel it. I will share with you some of the intersectionalities that we need to understand as we talk about these issues. But part of why it becomes, or somebody feels that they can actually do such horrendous things and walk around without feeling ashamed, is in some part we've also gotten them to think it is fine to be violent. So as we talk about never again, we need to understand that the gender conflict has been here longer. CC is worried about the 30 years. It's very short, the 30 years. For years, the women have been marginalized, the women have been beaten, the women have been killed. So many things have happened, and we have one former minister, Defense Minister Opa, used to talk about an issue where a woman becomes only valuable when she has died. When you are alive and you say, I'm being beaten, and you are asking to be assisted by your own relatives and whoever else would help you, you are told to go back. Once you die, people want 20 cattle, they want 40 cattle, they want all this. I'm not saying that 20 cattle equals the life of a woman, but you start to see the action that you didn't see when somebody was asking for assistance. So as we talk about the issue of transitional justice, we need to really understand that the gender conflict has been there for a long time. And as long as we don't address it in the mainstream, it will continue to be there, and women will continue to be silent victims. We will continue to be silent heroes that nobody appreciates by the time we then say we have gotten a solution, or we have gotten to a point where we are recognizing the key actors of the situation or the transitional justice that we've done. One of the experiences that we have talking about gender is we usually come right at the end. So even as you speak, you are so pressed for time, and you're trying to organize yourself very quickly and still not look foolish in front of people. But for some of us, we then take that also even as a gender issue. Because we started in the morning and we were relaxed. As we lost more and more time, we then had to cut on the time that people will speak on. So although people have prepared presentations, you then have to quickly run through your presentations and still organize yourself. But that is okay. For us, we are saying as long as we are able to sit around the table and talk about the issues, there is still hope. One person who's here educated us recently about the cost of not talking, where he was telling us that a lot of the conflict that we get comes out of people not being able to express themselves, not being able to understand that, you know, we've got this diversity or we've got divergent views. How do we still coexist although we are different? So for me, for the Gender Commission, as long as we're able to still continue engaging, it means that there is hope for us to be able to address what needs to be addressed. When we talk about the gender conflict, we are saying that we have some cultural behavior, harmful cultural practices, that although when we look at our new constitution that is progressive, our laws that are progressive should have been removed, or should at least have been removed or our laws should have been strengthened to deal with those harmful cultural practices. But we find that year in, year out, with all the education that as a country we are credited with, we are not addressing those cultural practices. Why does this happen? Because as we live as people, we live through a dual legal system, where the laws are there and clear, and yes, they could be improved, but at least they are clear to some extent. But what really subsists is what it is that we teach our children. Be able to work together and make them work, especially when the commissions are there and there is a constitution that is very progressive that we can then use. As she says, that we need to be able to hold each other to account. We need to be able to go to the institutions and hold them to account. So for me, it's very important that the institutions, beginning with the family as an institution, takes accountability for what is happening, not just within the household, but even within our society. I will not go into detail about the content of our constitution. The constitution today outlaws discrimination. It outlaws gender inequality on the basis of sex. But we find that despite that being there, it still continues to be normal that you can have a private sector practices which actually says we do not take any women. We do not take them because they will go on maternity leave, they will do this and they will do that. It is there. As long as we don't deal with those other conflicts, it means by the time we get to the more difficult, and I'm not saying more difficult because those ones are not important, but when we get to these highly emotional ones, it will be very difficult for us to find each other and address those issues. So it is very important that we come together and say, you know what, never again should there be inequality. Never again should we think that somebody is not important just because she was born or he was born a different sex from me. Nonhlehle said that when we talk about gender, it's not about women, it's about men and women. Yes, it is about men and women. But again, as we talk in the context of the political discourse, why we need to talk about gender equality, we have to not forget that when we say it's about men and women, men are still better positioned than the women. even in the most difficult of situations, when we go even to Bukuraundi and we look at the situation that the men were in, you will still find that the women were worse off. And even now, as we try to memorialize, the women are still not focusing on themselves. They are focusing on the people that are important in their lives. And this is what we have socialized them to do. So it is important that, as we say, men and women need to work together around gender. For me, the whole credo about men, gender is about men and women, who will really start to hold true when I see the mainstream space taking up gender issues. Instead of the mainstream space or some people coming into the space that is the gender movement and taking the few resources that are there to do gender work. Because at the end of the day, one of the things we need to be very aware of is, as we talk about these issues, it all boils down to power. And if men are already in power being the leaders, there's nothing that should stop them to use that leadership, to use that power to fix whatever is wrong with our society. So at the end of the day, it's very important that the discourse about gender being about men and women, we need to then be able to say yes, but it does not mean that their issues are the same. Look at that picture. A lot of the times people will say, we need equality. Equality is the goal we are looking for. Equality is not the means that we need to use. Because when you use equality as a means, the picture you get is the first one, where the man is very tall and he can actually just stand and watch into the stadium. But because you are saying equality means you're going to give the same kind of resources, the same kind of push to somebody who's more vulnerable. So at the end of the day, we need to be very aware that as we talk about transitional justice, as we talk about any justice, that needs to start with being fair. That needs to start with asking ourselves at an individual level, what is it that I've done that has brought us to this space? A lot of the times when I'm on social media, the only question I can ask is, how did we get here? How did we get here? And of course, in my practical work, I'm also saying, what is it that I can do in the meantime to get us from here? So it is important that we recognize that we need to really, as we seriously engage with meaningful transitional justice, the issue of diversity is taken very seriously. It's not just about saying men, women, or whatever else disaggregation you are going to use. It's about really understanding the differences, not just in terms of who I am, but in terms of how I relate with the issue, in terms of the meaning that I have regarding the issue that we are trying to deal with. Once we also get to that point where we understand the way we are different and recognize that just because we are different does not mean it's a bad thing. We could even be a stronger force in that difference. I'll share very quickly around issues of how we deal with differences, where you find even in our programming, not just as, and I've just joined public service from the civil society movement, but you find that even as we do our work, a lot of the times people will fight about the different strategies we use, rather than acknowledging that the different strategies we use make us stronger as a movement. The one strategy, I'll give an example from the women's movement. WOZA will do the campaigns, will be in the street, and they will confront the law enforcement agents. And other people will see that as not being useful. But for me, I see it as being very good, because somebody needs to be in the street making noise, really bringing the points home in a very forceful way. And then at the same time, at some point, once you've gotten the other side to listen and take you seriously, because they don't listen and take you seriously because you think you are serious. They listen and take you seriously because you are making noise. You are making them feel uncomfortable. Somebody will then need to go to the table and negotiate how we move from that situation where we are not happy. And so it might not be WOZA that is at the table, it's another organization that's there. That makes us very powerful. And part of why I'm so happy to be with the Gender Commission is I've seen a space that, as a person who lived since 1992 in the civil society movement, we would do a lot of advocacy, we would do research, we would do very intelligent sounding papers, but there just seemed to be a point where you couldn't go any further. And when I look at the constitutional bodies to me now and look at their mandates, they provide a framework within which we can then take it to the next level. And I will share with you before I finish how we can actually do that and how we have understood our work as the Gender Commission in terms of ensuring that we can hold institutions, we can hold private and public institutions to account for not being honest and not being just. When we talk about gender equality, we are saying as we go into trying to find a way of moving, maybe not moving beyond, but recognizing that we have all been hurt by our past, no matter how we describe it. We need to be able to then go to our constitution and say, what is it that we are saying we are looking for? What are the rights that our constitution have given us that we can then use to hold people to account, to hold institutions to account? Our constitution, for example, is very clear on the rights of women and other groups. It's very clear. Our constitution is clear on the right to justice, the right to public participation. It's very clear on the right to health and personal security and bodily integrity. It is clear in section 52. The right to life is there in the constitution. The issue of good governance is there in the constitution. This provides a way in which we can use what the constitution says to hold people to account. It's not necessarily holding that person, it's holding the institution, the position of authority that somebody is holding, that we use from the constitution. And what is it we'll be looking for as we are doing this? I'm looking at the moderator. What are the changes we are looking for? We want to be able to get our people to really understand that they have rights. They're citizens. You may not be enjoying the rights, but you do have the rights the Constitution has given us. So we need to be able to raise awareness among our people, because the rights, awareness and consciousness is what also governs it. The person who takes a decision to take action, because they know they are taking action, not just because I'm feeling hurt, but because I understand that I'm feeling hurt, but I do have a way I can actually seek recourse. It doesn't necessarily mean that when I seek recourse, I get it. But the point is I have to make the first step to actually ask, to demand the rights that my constitution has talked about. We need to be able to also see that the position and the condition of our people is improved. So as we sit here and talk about transitional justice, it's very closely, I read the reports from the other 2 days, very closely related to the issues of resources. Who gets what resources? Who is not getting what resources? What is it I need to do to reduce the competition for the resources? So it's important that we recognize that the greater discussion is also as important to the political discussion. And then we also talk about the issue, 5 minutes? Okay. We also talk about the issue of needing to be able to work together as institutions with the citizens of our country and informed, and that was said this morning, that it has to be victim-centered. It has to be centered on the one who's feeling the shoes that are too tight, who tells you that these ones are too tight. Can I get another size? So it's important that we are able to work and be informed and be led by those whose lives have to change. And as a country, we do not necessarily have a shortage of progressive constitution, the laws and policies, even policies, but it's the implementation that becomes a challenge. And we need to be able to get to a point where we say, let the instruments mean something in our lives. How do we expect to shift the power relations? Because all of this boils down to power relations. I am more vulnerable because I don't have enough power. And you are more stronger because you have power. Whatever your source of the power, so at the end of the day, we need to be able to say, as we do the policy for transitional justice, how are we going to shift the power relations beyond which parties are different, beyond which other issues make us different, but to also look at the gender differences. Because that also becomes where we start from, and where we'll either make it or we won't make it. As we talk about this, and even with our misgivings, and I'm doing this without asking the other commissions, but I can say that because I read the Constitution and it's what tells me what mandate we have. It can always be improved. The mandates of the individual commissions can always be improved as we learn lessons as we go about our work. In what way can we use the NPRC? In what way can we use the Human Rights Commission? In what way can we use the Gender Commission? The Zimbabwe Media Commission, it also doesn't come out very closely here, but we do know the power of the media to either make the situation worse or to actually mitigate the situation. How are we also engaging with the media from a perspective of wanting to shift the toxic power issues that we are talking about? We look at even the issue, the ZEC, it's there. We saw in the last elections that some power was exercised, and that power can still also be exercised to ensure that more women get into leadership. Because the constitution is clear that we talk about 50-50. How do we get that to happen as we go through the electoral processes? Because otherwise, at the end of the day, the ones you want to negotiate with may not be feeling the pain that you're feeling as a person who was powerless, unless you're in decision making. And then I will just very quickly, I will not read the other whole page I have of some of the actions, practical strategies that we need to consider, unless the moderator is gracious enough to allow me very quickly to just say that I have a matrix that you see that we can practically use to then say how do we move from a situation of conflict, which is not gender sensitive, to trying to address that. And this can be done in terms of what kind of responsive action can we take once something has happened to ensure that vulnerable groups are not further marginalized. What kind of remedial action can we take? In the morning, people talked about psychosocial support. We talk about the legal and medical services that are needed. And that needs to be something we think about as we go into the transitional justice programming. What is it that we need to do to build the kind of environment where never again will what we are talking about here happen? Or at least not at that same scope. Although once you say that, you then feel that you are minimizing something. So never again should this be happening. What is it that we need to do to ensure that we've got the kind of social, economic, political, and whatever other environment that really makes you feel at an individual level that this is not acceptable? And as we do that, we're also looking at how can we support affected persons? How can we facilitate protection? How can we promote peace building? This is a relatively old document, so I was talking about peace building, but I remember when I went for the training with Africa University, we were told that when you talk about peace, peace is negative. Because it hides so many things, so many people who are unhappy but are not able to speak out. So how can we facilitate and promote conflict transformation in a way that doesn't force other people to be quiet about their being unhappy? How can we facilitate participation in governance? And a lot of the people think when we say governance, we're just talking about governance at a political level. Governance starting in the house. There is a governance system that happens at domestic level. Governance within our families, governing at the community. How can we ensure that we facilitate participation? And how can we ensure conflict sensitivity as we are working around transitional justice? Because it was said this morning, we think we are helping, but you use certain words that further traumatize people. Or you even adopt some systems that you tell the world have worked, but may have actually injured the other vulnerable groups more. I was lucky some years back to go to Rwanda, and people talk about the gacaca system. It was good. People came into the public, they talked, they said sorry to each other and everything. It looks was okay. But when you then would sit with the women on the side, it does not end there. You were in public talking about your experience. That creates a whole other stigmatizing that will haunt you again in addition to the original problem. So we need to be able to be gender sensitive as we say, what is it we are going to be doing? And as I'm going to finish, I'm sure, okay, I wanted to do some advertising of the Gender Commission. I'll do that. I was going to read, but I'm going to speak. As the Gender Commission, we've already had, we are one of the 5 constitutional bodies that are supposed to also facilitate that we, and I'm just taking one of the areas where we remedy injustices of the past. And how we do this is we're expected to monitor any gender equality violations. We're supposed to investigate cases or complaints of gender equality violations. We are supposed to recommend prosecution, and she has already talked about, when you say may, that we are supposed to recommend, and it's a start prosecution where we see that something has gone wrong. And we are supposed to also advise private and public institutions on what they can do to improve the situation for women and men and other groups. And so I find that there is hope for us to come together. CSOs, faith-based organizations, development partners, whatever stake you hold in this issue, and say how do we come together and hold hands to actually fix our society, to fix our country. And for me, I'm motivated because unlike other people, mine is not an easy identity. Somebody can say I'm Ndebele, and so you can take a side on you can stand on the side of the Ndebele people. Or somebody can say I'm Shona, so you take your side and you think you are very clear about what is happening as a Shona person. I come from both. I was born in 1970, my parents divorced in 1973, and the biggest issue was that difference. And throughout that, so when you talk about how people felt when Bukura Hundi was happening, how you feel today, for me, I'm torn. Torn, not that I'm confused and saying it was okay, but torn because I know it was not okay. But torn because when I then find a space in my family to express myself, I am divided. I don't know whether I'm making sense, and I really apologize if I'm making it difficult or seemingly saying that mine is a bigger problem. It is not, but it is just a situation I find myself in. But even though that becomes a challenge I have, it is also an opportunity because I am part of my two sides. And so I have space within those two sides to be talking and to bring them together. And so I'm saying the intersectionalities that we have are something that we can use to be able to come together. Now we know that, like I'm talking about this, my mother was born in Botswana. I have a daughter-in-law who's from Malawi. And so you find that at some point it's not straightforward this or that. It's so many things. And I'm sure for a lot of us, we've got those things that bring us together. And so the appeal is to say, what is it that brings us together that we can then use to hold hands and be able to fix this? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Virginia. You had quite a detailed presentation. I just wanted to reiterate one thing that you said that really stuck with me was around the importance of having a victim-centered approach. And you use the analogy of this size does not fit me, so can I have another size that will fit me? That is a very powerful metaphor. Wow. Wow, wow. Thank you once again to my lovely panel. Please can we have another round of applause? We are still within time. I'm going to allow 15 minutes for questions, comments, break for lunch. So please raise your hands. I see Tony at the back, gentleman in front. 3, 4, 5. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, the panelists. Difficult stuff to listen to and difficult to think about the solutions. I want to pick up on Virginia's point, how to shift the power relations. The Ministry of the Environment was clustered with critical ministries and given the right of veto. So they put them with energy and they put them with... And they said, every time you want to pass something, we have the right of veto. That's not ecological, you can't do it. And that changed the policy in Costa Rica. It changed the policy so dramatically that they increased their rainforest by 15% in a decade. And it grew, and it grew, and it grew. So maybe we have to think about this insane arrangement we have of the siloed ministries, because, as you're saying, right, at the end, suddenly we have the discussion with women. How about thinking, and I'm thinking about policy, a major governmental policy would be the right of veto, where you thought about where the ministries were that you were allowed to have the veto. So on resources and on certain kinds of things, I suggest that would make a radical change to how we go.
Right. I just want to thank the second presenter. That's Nikiwe, I suppose. I think you really have shown you've got the courage, and we will definitely support you. Now, you raised a very good question about a Kura-Wundi bill, and I remember sometime in 2007, Professor Jonathan Moyo actually presented that bill in Parliament. I don't know what happened to that bill. Maybe the honorable members of Parliament here might actually assist us to do and give us information what happened to that bill. Then the other comment I just want to put across is about the commissions. I think the only commission that I've had in my life is that has actually produced results was the Sandura Commission. All these commissions, which have been actually commissioned using Nikiwe's language, they just hero worship a bunch of civil servants that we employ. So my comment to the commission is, if you can't produce any results, why don't you just step down?
Michelle, let's take the two questions from the back, and then the gentleman here, and then the one in front. Thanks.
Hello. Okay, I would like to thank the first speaker, the facilitator. She's talking about the role played by women, especially even during the war, and the relevancy of writing the true history. Honestly speaking, the role played by women during the war was so massive. So massive, if you take into consideration that every guerrilla that came into the country never carried food with themselves. But it was only women that could make such food to feed the entire period of the war. But during that time, there were a lot of some military actions that caught these women in between the Rhodesian soldiers and the guerrillas, which made it possible to have some people that were killed or injured in crossfire. At independence, there was an act that at least made it possible for all those that were caught in crossfire, irregardless of being a guerrilla or being just a mere civilian. And it is very unfortunate that with the scenario that befell us at independence, no one could come forward to say, I got injured because I was a war activist. Women were not compensated. As Zipra Keda, myself, our archives were taken away from us by this government. One of the information, most of the information that was contained there was to report back to the people. Having reported back to the people so that at least those families that lost their loved ones during the war were supposed to be told exactly where your son fell or your daughter fell. For the purpose of compensating those, because the War Victims Act again allows people to be compensated because you lost somebody during the war. But the families were never compensated. So, you can imagine the double tragedy that befell women. We contributed monies towards our future to buy properties. And the reason why we contributed such funds were not for us, the survivors, but it was supposed to cater for those that fell during the war. And up to now, that information is stuck there with the present government, and our mothers have got nothing. A point to be remembered, the Magnet House here in Bulawayo which houses the CIO, they are staying there free of charge when it is supposed to have been part and parcel of the compensation of the families of those that are alive and those that fell during the war. The Queen's Park Police Station in Queen's Park, which was a disabled accommodation for the war dead or the war injured, is housing the policemen today. The Snake Park in Harare is lying idle and somebody is sitting on those properties. It is very unfortunate that those properties are there after the arrest and release of Dumiso Tabenwa and Lookout Masu and many others. And the reason why, after their acquittal, we still have not received those properties, it is because it was a presidential act that is sitting on them. And we honestly, sincerely demand that the president must remove that lead from that, so that people, we don't want to bother government by asking for compensations, but we have got our properties that can at least sustain part and parcel of this development of transitional justice, because we need justice like yesterday. Thank you.
Commission, because I see this session it's good to get the women, the young women at that, to be up here and to speak up on gender questions. But I think I would have wanted to see some men show up on the gender question, because gender, as we said here, is not about women. I also say this from a long historical practice, by the way. I'm not just starting on this issue, because I was in the African Union Gender Task Force when it was set up by Winnie Byanyima. And to add to your bit of information, I was also part of the only married couple on the Gender Task Force. So I know what I'm talking about in terms of ghettoization of gender issues in institutions. So I hope that we can see a better handling of gender issues in the Gender Task Force and in the gender mainstreaming in all projects and programs, so that there's gender proofing of all that we do, and not just as one subject out of 10 in a 3-day symposium. I'm not criticizing this symposium, but I'm just saying what normally happens is that the gender becomes a must mention and not something that actually transcends all that we are doing in a process like this one, where women feature among the victims, amongst the people who try to do something, and as Comrade Stolle said here, who were also victimized, even as combatants, ex-combatants. So we tend to play that down and think of women doing nothing. But some of them actually were very important insofar as trying to resist where they were. The plunder of people, the rape of young people, the abduction of young people, and they paid for it. And the final point I want to make about this is that talking about gender and other contentious issues, you will be accused of being an extremist, or as I was in the 90s, to my surprise, because I thought I was talking something normal, I was told I was reopening old wounds by talking about Kukuraundi in an international seminar in Harare. And my response then, and I'm happy I said it then, this was about 1996, it was that people should not tell me about the reopening of wounds, because the science of wounds is that only the person who has been wounded can say when the wound is healed, not anybody else to prescribe that the wound is healed and you are opening it up by complaining or by saying the compensation, the apologies, they're all missing, let alone adequate. So I hope that this is the start of an unapologetic handling of the gender issues. I was held up in some other thing. I especially wanted to visit all of this program today, but at least I caught part of it. And I am happy that the language I hear is a language which has no apology, but which is saying this thing is not about being polite. It's about making sure that perpetrators know it, the people who are trying to correct things know what they're trying to correct. Otherwise, if you give a mechanic to come in and make the cake, it is a fruitless exercise. So we must ensure that the right people are doing the right thing and at the right time and without being apologetic in evaluating what they are doing. Thank you.
Last question, thanks.
Thank you, Chairperson. It's quite a mouthful, but I'll try to be short. Udadwethu Nikki, she's making very interesting observations and sending a lot of questions, interesting questions as well. And in the process, she touched on a very important subject that is dear to me, which is devolution. Yes, the government made pronouncements yesterday that I would say pretend to actually okay the devolution clause. But if you look at what's happening on the ground, especially in Matabeleland in relation to the genocide that happened, it explains why some of us feel that the Gukura only changed form in 1987 and took up another form, which is economic genocide. Because if you look at the devolution, it speaks to mainly two aspects of governance, which is political space and power and resources. And if you look at Matabeleland currently, I'll give an example of Bulawayo, which has more than, I think, 2/3 of councillors who are not natively from Bulawayo. And this means that every weekend they leave Bulawayo in vehicles full of allowances they make from council sittings to somewhere else outside Bulawayo, outside Matabeleland. That's where they spend that money. And there's no economic benefit out of the exercise at the end of the day, because they come here and take the money to spend somewhere else to benefit and develop other areas other than Bulawayo and Matabeleland. Recently, I think it was 2013, if I'm not mistaken, we had an MP who won a seat in Gwanda, but went to celebrate the victory in Berengwa. And that's how devolution has been affected in this country, where we see that, and we even think that the government is now coming around on devolution because they know they've placed their stooges, people who pursue the narrow and non-development agenda, an agenda that is not for the development of Matabeleland, but for individuals and the state, as it may be.
Please, can you conclude? So,
we may celebrate the pronouncements by the Minister of Finance, but in actual sense, we do not have a devolution in place. I'm being cut short. The silence on the commissions that were set up during the 1980s on Kukurawundi. I think we remember how clear was the establishment during that time. Robert Mugabe was clear, you don't talk about Kukurawundi or else in Zabchai. So we had no power to actually demand those, because demanding the results of the Tumbuchena Commission was tantamount to speaking about Kukurawundi. So it became very difficult to move an inch as concerns the Kukurawundi. And it was very difficult to actually come up with ways to addressing that and having a solution to that. Then my sister from the Human Rights, from the Gender Commission, we have the same identity. When I say my mother is Shona, my father is Ndebele. But I don't think it must be difficult for anyone to speak to these issues because there's only one thing that should be able to unite us, which is justice. So an injustice is an injustice, regardless who commits it. If it's my people who commit a genocide, I should be able to denounce it and speak to ways of solving that and delivering justice to the affected, regardless of malume or I think it should be easy that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all the questions. My arm has been twisted, and very last request from the only female wanting to ask a question, exercising her right as my executive director. So Nofundo, if you can please make a very short question or a comment or an answer. Thank you. And then I'll have
for the TJ processes or leading the nation from civil society to faith-based organization. And Ntlanhla, you know you did a journey for us as CSVR in transforming our own attitude as an organization. And I was surprised at just how much of the gender stereotypes I had internalized without being aware of that. So I'm really interested in the responsibility then of those in leadership and the implementers in actually dealing with their own prejudice. Because one of the biggest obstacles is that we don't do the difficult task of asking ourselves, because you'll be surprised at how many those who speak the language of gender transformation, they themselves still hold those prejudices and therefore block women. So I'm just really interested in our own responsibility in this room in working on ourselves in order to enable for this to happen.
Thank you very much for these rich questions and comments. I'm going to allow, we're a little bit over time, but I will allow 10 minutes for my panelists and then we will break. Thank you. Ntlanhla, we can start with you.
Thank you. I will actually start with the third last question, which I found both important and quite interesting. Important because, so the question was in relation to the women-only panel around gender. So, and I think that's an important question to ask, right? But I also find it quite interesting that that question is only coming now. And it's only coming at this point when we have a women-only panel. And we have had men-only panels throughout this whole symposium. And talking about very real and important issues that women can very well ably speak to. So I think it's a question that we need to remain with throughout all of these processes. And then to the comment made around the role of women in war and in violence and in liberation, I think for me, I would like to pose a challenge to ZAPU and to other political parties to say, how can these actors and the stakeholders play a role around undoing this lie of the invisibilization and the silencing of women's voices in history? And I think that's a role that all of us ought to proactively play. And then I can only just underscore what Nofundo has said around the issue of dealing with our own prejudices. And I think all of us do carry this because we come from contexts and societies that teach us and model how we should behave as women or as men, as girls and as boys. And it is a constant journey that we ought to be challenging ourselves towards transformation, because as I said earlier, gender is not a fixed concept. Gender is constantly changing.
I also have a question that I would like to leave and perhaps get an answer over lunch. I'm interested to know, of the Zimbabwean War Veterans Compensation Fund, how many women benefited from that process?
Thank you. I don't have much to answer to, fortunate for me. Unfortunately, I don't know much about it. I don't know much of what had transpired of it, but I'm sure it's an avenue that we can pursue as a nation. So is devolution, my brother. I think it's an opportunity that we can use now that things seem to be building up. We didn't have that opportunity. I think people touched on those issues yesterday when we were at Amaku, to say this dispensation that we are having right now, we didn't have it. So we can use this channel and gap to actually ventilate and demand justice. Thank you.
Sorry if I gave an impression that I'm saying my identity makes it difficult. The only part that is difficult is the issue of the narratives, and I was very happy this morning when somebody said that we don't have to have the narratives agree, because the narratives are different, because I've had to maneuver between the narratives, and so half the time one narrative then marginalizes you or draws you in. So this is the part I was saying. At a personal, at a professional, and just at a citizen level, it's not difficult for me to do what I can to ensure that my identity works to our advantage. I actually did say that in the presentation. It's an opportunity for all of us. And Sis Notlantla ably answered the question about why women marry. And I would just retain it with saying the place where we need to be focusing equality is the mainstream. Because this is where we have the obscene inequalities. This is where you might find that there are no women. If we were to go to the economists, to the finance people that came up with the budget, you might find that the women are not there. So we can sit here and try to come up with ways of making the constitutions able to work with all our misgivings, but if the finances are not there, they might not be able to work. So it's really to say, let's go to the mainstream and ensure that in the mainstream, equality is there and it will solve everything else. And just also my brother from the political parties. In our political systems, the political parties hold the key to whether we will have equal participation by men and women. Because you are at that level of the political parties, you decide who goes to represent you. And then when you have decided who goes to represent you, whatever we come up with is the pool from which the political leaders at least are chosen. So I would also throw it back to the political parties and say, let's work together, let's find a way of ensuring that our constitution and our feelings of being hurt by inequalities also include the inequalities that are gender-based.
Thank you.
One round of applause, please. Thank you very much. From you all. Before we break for lunch, just a few housekeeping. Meal tickets will be issued at the door as we leave for lunch. Lunch is at the same venue as we had it on Wednesday. And lastly, those who haven't registered for the museum tour tonight, kindly find the time to do so.